Y'all have Bibles?
Yes.
Let's break them out. We're going to be all over the Word today. If I were you, just for fun, turn to the book of Matthew. We'll begin in chapter 9. We'll get there in just a second as I set the table. If you were sitting and you don't have a Bible or a digital Bible, can I invite you to have one? We do offer them for free unless you have the entire thing memorized. It's always good to be able to follow along. There may be those rare people that do better without holding it and you can just pay attention. I do tend to be one of those, so I'm not going to force people to hold Bibles. But can I challenge you to be a Berean, be a student of the Word? Please don't take my word for anything. Now, Lord willing, I am a voice that will bring forth the Word properly presented, but you should always be looking for yourself. What does the Word say? Good, I heard a couple amens out there. So I want to begin a multi-part series today. Those who may not know, I like to teach in series. It's a great format. Repetition is a good teacher. And in years past, I try not to reuse material really ever, but sometimes I do hit similar things. We're going to be looking at a new application of this, but I want to underscore something that I shared back in 2013. That if you look at the ministry of Jesus and his teaching style, all eyes this way, how many realize Jesus was a pretty good teacher? Now, Cheryl is a professional teacher for decades. You might have been really good, and I can see that I would have thrived under your care. But how many will admit Jesus was a pretty good teacher? And if you look at his ministry and his teaching, he employed three specific elements in his teaching. Again, this is just setting the table. Those who are here, if you happen to be teachers, or you happen to invest in our younger ones, or if you have kids, this is still applicable. Three things that Jesus did to communicate or convey truth. Number one, parables. How many know that Jesus taught in parables? All the time. Jesus often used short, simple, and memorable stories in order to convey rich, deep spiritual truths. And I have in my notes, who can think of his ministry without thinking of the parable of the sower, the wheat and the tares, the persistent widow, the unmerciful servant, the good Samaritan, the lost coin, the lost sheep, the prodigal son, the parable of the talents, and more. 30 plus parables. Now, fun fact, how many of you are Bible nerds? Great, all of you. All of the parables of Jesus appear only in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. None in the book of John. Did I just blow your mind, or does anybody not really care about that fun fact? Don't answer out loud, I'll move on. The second thing that Jesus employed beyond short stories was Proverbs. I'm not referring to the book of Proverbs per se, but the method of teaching that employs Proverbs. A proverb is a short, memorable, impacting statements that were designed to convey a lot of truth in a short amount of real estate. Why do you think the book of Proverbs is called the book of Proverbs? Because it's quite literally a book or a compilation of different individual one-line sayings. Let me give you a few of Jesus's. See if these sound familiar. One line, one sentence. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Think of how short that is. How many words? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. How much is conveyed in 11 words? Volumes. That's a lot of material covered in a very short amount of real estate. And it's funny that as I began to say it, and I took a break just for a breath, you all began to fill it in because they're memorable. How about this one? Judge not, lest ye be judged. For those who like to walk around looking down on other people and giving them a hard time and saying, wow, they should, hey, because by the metric that you use to assess others, what if the Lord adopts that to assess you? Seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. That's a proverb. It's a one-line statement of truth. Jesus was famous for these. One of his own self-declarations, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. All of these are just one-line statements that are used to convey truth. The third element that Jesus used, and this is where we're going to go deeper for the next couple of weeks, questions. Questions are vital tools used by teachers to stimulate learning, growth, and discovery. How many people realize that teachers love to use questions? That in itself is a question. See, I just tricked you a little bit. Scripture records, and again, it depends on what translation and beyond, but well over 100 individual specific questions that Jesus asked during his earthly ministry. It's about 135 in the NIV. And I thought it would be fun to spend a number of weeks looking at the questions that Jesus asked. Now, one or two of them might be familiar, and I'm probably going to gloss over those quickly to get into some newer ones we really haven't touched base, not in a long time, maybe if ever. Because again, of 135 different questions, I have a lot of material to draw upon. How many are ready for a 135-point sermon this morning? Excellent, Cheryl. My goal, everyone say goal, is to cover 6 questions a week for the next 3 weeks, meaning I'll probably cover 2 or 3 a week, and this will become a 12-week series, but I digress. I'm going to skip the first question, download the notes. If I have time this morning, I'll circle back and hit it. But I want to begin in Matthew 9. And as we read, starting at verse 27, I want you to take note of the question that Jesus asked in this text. Matthew 9:27. As Jesus went on from there, it says in the text that 2 blind men followed him, calling out, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." And we see there a recognition of his royalty, his kingship, if you will. And when he had gone indoors, the blind men came to him, and he asked them, who asked? Jesus asked them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" What was their reply? "Yes, Lord," they replied. And then he touched their eyes, and he said, "According to your faith, let it be done unto you." And their sight was restored. Now, I don't want to linger long here because I have touched on this question at numerous times or at varying seasons throughout my time at New Life, some 2 or 3 different times in my 15 years here. But I want to just look at that question. Do you believe that I'm able to do this? And I want to emphasize it, as I like to do with this question, kind of one word at a time. Let's place the emphasis on the first word, do. Do you believe that I'm able to do this? It's a question because of this one word that will end in only one of 2 answers. It is a yes or it is a no. And your answer will demonstrate or evidence your lack of faith or your presence of faith. What's the second word? Do you believe? I like to envision Jesus making eye contact with these men whose eyes were not functioning, but he's looking at them. And he's saying, do you believe that I'm able to do this? It's a deeply personal and a deeply probing question from which there is no hiding, evasion, or deflection. Individually, they did or they did not. Do you believe that I'm able to do this? It's a question that reveals the degree to which these 2 men were willing and able to rely upon the Lord. Moving quickly. Do you believe that I am able to do this? All eyes this way. Faith always, biblical faith always requires an object. We don't just have faith for the sake of having faith. You go out there in the highways and byways of life and you talk to people about Christianity and what you believe, and they might reply with, well, I have faith. You know what I've learned to ask? Nicely, tactfully, lovingly, and not in a jerk-like manner. By the way, don't be jerks, be nice. What do you believe? Oh, I have faith. Oh, in what? Or in whom? And I watch people for their responses. See, like Jesus, I want to use questions to bring out of people where they really are at in relationship to him. Well, I just have faith. That kind of faith will not avail you. Our faith needs to be particular and specific, honed in on Jesus. Do you believe that I am able to do this? Final one, you can download the notes for more if you'd like, but do you believe that I'm able to do this? You see, there's a specificity here. It's not, do you believe that I'm able to meet your needs in a general, vague, nebulous sense, but I'm talking about this. This thing that you've come to me for, your blindness, do you believe I'm genuinely able to bring remedy to that? Once again, he's getting to the heart of the matter. It's a yes or it's a no. In your life, maybe it's good to have some specificity. Lord, I am trusting you with this. I am entrusting this into your hands. Whatever that this may be. In Cheryl's this may be different than my this in any given season, different than yours, different than yours, different than... That's how it goes. We're all unique. We're all at different places in the walk. So Jesus comes to us and he comes alongside and says, hey, do you believe I'm able to do this? How you answer matters. And can I be honest with you? If your answer is genuinely no, don't lie. But how about you use that as a starting point rather than an ending point? Lord, if I'm honest with you and I'm wrestling, I'm not sure I believe, but I want to. And watch what he can do. You see, the Lord has big shoulders. He's heard it all before. There's nothing that you can tell him that's going to surprise him. Because when he asks a question, he already knows the answer, but there's power in us confessing and recognizing where we are. Do you believe I'm able to do this? What's your this in your life that he is calling you to trust him with? Maybe it's a child. Maybe it's a bill. Maybe it's a career decision. Maybe it's a marriage that's broken behind the scenes. Maybe it's some personal sin that no one knows about, but you know about it and he knows about it. And it's, Lord, I want to be free. He's not moved by need. This world is riddled with need. According to the text, he's moved by faith. According to your what, let it be done to you. According to your faith. You see, I've been hitting this theme of faith a lot in the last month. It's amazing how often it keeps coming up, and I realized in the midst of worship this morning that all of the questions this morning will deal with faith. So if you're uncomfortable, buckle up, because here we go. Next question, John chapter 5. Please turn there. John 5. I love the word. That might sound silly from a pastor, but I love the word. Because I love how no matter how old you are, what country you live in, what year it is, it just pierces. It exposes, but it also invites us higher and onward and upward. John 5, we're going to pick it up a little bit into verse 1, maybe a word or two in. Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now, there is in Jerusalem near the Sheep Gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, in which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Now, here a great number, and again, tap into your imagination center here. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. Now, it's interesting because if you look closely, there's probably a footnote where verse 4 should be. And that footnote is there saying that some translations, but not enough to justify its presence, include a verse 4. How many in your Bibles you see that little footnote or asterisk? And it says something along the following lines, which again was likely included after the fact, so we can't treat this to the same degree as Bible. But they waited for the moving of the waters. From time to time, an angel of the Lord would come down and stir up the waters. The first one into the pool after each disturbance would be cured of whatever disease they had. In other words, according to ancient tradition, this pool would occasionally, or I'm going to use the word allegedly, be touched by an angelic being, and the first one into the waters would receive some kind of healing or cure. Now pick it up in verse 5. One who was there had been an invalid for how long? 38 years. I'm 44. That's the vast percentage of my lifetime. And when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in that condition for a long time, I want you to look at the question Jesus asks. Do you want to get well? Now we're going to stop there. Do you want to get well? After 38 years, that's a rather bizarre question to ask and to have to entertain. Look at verse 7. Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. And again, this goes back to that tradition that I just referenced from verse 4. While I'm trying to get in, someone goes ahead of me. And then Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat and walk. And at once the man was cured, and he picked up his mat and walked. I cannot imagine, I am not medically inclined enough to imagine the atrophy in the condition of that man's legs and muscles to be able to get up and move after 4 decades of non-use. So when he gets up and walks, I envision muscle growing and development and instantaneous transformation. In other words, this is a pretty cool thing to watch. Now, we could spend all day talking about the healing, but backtrack to the question. Do you want to get well? Why did Jesus ask that question? Again, it's rather bizarre, wouldn't you say? I did some study on this. And there seems to be 2 schools of thought. And they both could be true, or a combination of the 2 could be true. One commentary that I find to be reputable on the whole says that this question was posed, and I quote, to rouse the sick man out of his lethargy and despondency. It was the first step towards the man having sufficient faith. He must be inspired with some expectation of being cured. So perhaps Jesus used this question to set the table, to get this guy to maybe say, you know what? Yeah, I actually do, to begin to foster some sense of forward momentum in a faith direction. Perhaps that's true. My little brain, and this is just me, always looks at it in the following way. Perhaps the invalid had become so wrapped up in his misery and misfortune that such things had become his very identity. And if Jesus healed him, who and what would he be? Where would he go? And what would become of his life? How many people in the sound of my voice realize that people can become so tied up in their brokenness that there comes a point they genuinely don't want to be free of it? Think about the children of Israel, recently freed from slavery. For how long? About 4 centuries plus. It's a rather long time. And the moment they're free, what do they begin to say? It was better back there. We knew who we were back there. Things were met, our needs were met. Our needs were met, food and water and shelter back there. You see, because having the faith to move forward in the Lord will at times mean abandoning the things that once identified you or characterized you. And that can be a scary thing to let go of. People begin to get used to being known as the widow or the invalid or the orphan. Those things become who and what you are. And when the Lord comes along and says, hey, do you want to be known by something better? Ooh, that's a tough question. We get so caught up in our problems that moving on from them becomes a frightful thing. Do you believe that Jesus is able to work in your life? That's question number 1 that we just covered. But question number 2 is, even if he's able and willing, do you genuinely want him to? Because I believe that the Lord is such a Lord that he respects the dignity of our choices, even when our choices are wrong. Do you want your marriage to be well? Do you want your mental health issues to be dealt with? Do you want better friends and family, not in terms of better people, but higher function? Or do you just want to stay where you are? Careful how you answer, because you'll get your wish. I came across this statement before we move on. When we complain to God about our circumstances or give him excuses as to why we're still in the same place, spiritually or emotionally, year after year, perhaps the question he aims at our hearts is, do you want to get well? Do you want to move forward? Do you want to make progress? Do you want to get to a new, better place that God has for you? Or do you want to let the situation and circumstance continue to define you? Oh, please choose well. When he whispers to your heart, do you want to get well? Matthew 8. If you're in John, turn to the left. Matthew chapter 8, we're going to pick it up in verse 23. And these next 2 questions are intertwined. Give me the best of your 10 minutes of attention, as I'm going to begin to tie up all the loose threads into a beautiful bow, Lord willing. If the rapture happens first, I won't complain. Matthew 8, verse 23, this is a familiar scene. The next scene will also be familiar. But again, let's talk about matters of faith. Matthew 8:23, it says, "Then he," referring to Jesus, "got into the boat and his disciples followed him." Verse 24, "Suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was..." Jesus, what's the matter with you? The disciples went to him to wake him up. "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." Of the 12, how many were former professional fishermen? At least 4. Peter, Andrew, James, John. They're rattled. How many years had these guys spent on a boat and gone through storms? But it's at a point where even they're rattled. If you're on a plane and you see the stewardess or you see the pilot and there's fear in their eyes, oh, buckle up. God save us, we're going to drown. In my mind, you wake up right now. What's the matter with you? Jesus, he comes out of the sleep. He had a wonderful little nap. Poor guy barely slept here and there. Look at what he says. You have little faith. Now keep in mind, this is a question. Why are you so afraid? Now again, this is where you love, and again, I'm saying this funnily, you love to smack them. What do you think we're afraid of? The boat's about to capsize. Even Peter's rattled. Jesus gets up and he rebukes the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. Now, verse 27, it says that the men, the disciples, they were amazed and asked, "What kind of a man is this, that even the wind and the waves obey him?" Bit of a rhetorical question. But I don't want to lose sight of Jesus' question. You have little faith. Why are you so afraid? And I always envision it not as a rebuke in a sense or a condemning tone. I don't think his eyes had that angry look to them. I always envision it as being very tender. Why are you so afraid? Again, the answer seems obvious. It was a rather dire situation. Storms were upon them, threatening to overtake the very boat and doom those who were in it. But you have to realize that by this point, the disciples had seen a few things. So when Jesus is asking them, "Why are you so afraid?" maybe you could add another word to that. Why are you still afraid? You see, it makes sense for you to be afraid when you don't know anything about me, but consider what you have seen and what you've been through. If you look back in the chapters previous to Matthew chapter 8, you're going to see that these are men who had seen the healing of disease and sickness, the casting out of demons, and the cleansing of lepers. This was a man who was just continually surrounded by the events of the supernatural from his beginning on, where it's a dove descended, the Spirit of God in bodily form, and there's a voice from heaven saying, "This is my son, follow him." All of it. There's an expectation that after all that you have seen, why are you still afraid? You see, if you're new to the Lord, maybe you've been serving him for a few weeks, a few months, or maybe even a year, I understand why fear in the beginning may be your default, because you haven't had enough life experience to really see him move. And by the way, to me, the Lord is a real being. I just don't talk about him as a character. He's the heart of what and who I am. And we all have stories, and hopefully you do. But if you've been serving him for longer than maybe a couple of years, and I'm not putting you down if you're older than that and you still struggle, because these guys did too. You have a record now of moments where you can look back and you can see, whether it be healings, provisions, supernatural works, you've seen him restore, renew. You've seen him meet you in dark hours, which means that when you go into a storm, it's his expectation that you rise up in that thing and say, "Lord, if you've done it before, you can do it again." That's how this thing is supposed to go. Now, in our moments of weakness, he doesn't condemn, but he does call us onward and upward. And I think he still asks this question: you have little faith. Why are you so afraid? And to those who are here this morning and you find yourself in a similar storm, fear is not the response that you need right now, but some trust. And if it's your first time going through a particular storm, I promise you it is not his. Our Father is a very experienced Father who has properly and successfully raised billions of people long before you were even conceived. Trust him. Go to Matthew 14, same book, a few pages to the right, because I want you to see the part B of this. I told you these questions were intertwined. Matthew 14, we're going to pick it up in verse 22. Follow me, I'm almost done. I'm making an investment in your heart this morning, praying for the Lord to use it to bring forth fruit in deeper levels of trust. Matthew 14, verse 22, it says a few words in, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat. By the way, if I'm following Jesus, I'm never getting in a boat with this man because something is always going on. But I digress. Jesus made the disciples. I love that. He didn't invite them. They were compelled into that boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. This is following the feeding of the thousands. Now, after he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray, and later that night he was there alone. And the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Verse 25, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified, and I totally get it. It's a ghost, they cried, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it's I. Don't be afraid. Now, Peter, in a rare moment of getting something right, says something pretty cool. Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. To which Jesus says, come. Peter gets down out of the boat, says he walked on the water and came toward Jesus, the only other person that I know of in history, biblical record, where they successfully walked on the water. But what's the first word in verse 30? But. However, when he saw the wind, when his eyes shifted from Jesus to something else, again, this is a common point, but it's one that I have to reaffirm because it's the common points that we mess up on in daily life and living. When he took his eyes off the Lord and he began to focus on other things, it says he began to sink. And now crying out, and thankfully Peter had the wherewithal that when he was drowning, he called out, Lord, save me. It's a reasonable question and request in the moment. Verse 31, immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. Now look at what we're going to see here. See if any of this sounds familiar. You of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. And those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. Now, I want to just make a note that if you compare and contrast this event from the Matthew 8 event, they are eerily similar. Couple of things. The disciples are in a boat, and the boat is being buffeted by some form of storm, wind, waves, and beyond. We see faith wavering in the midst of crisis, and Jesus once again asking a very similar question. You of little faith, why did you doubt? I think this is important again because this event in Matthew 14 happened sometime after the events in Matthew 8, which means that since the prior episode, these men had seen even more healings. They have seen even more demons cast out, even more lepers cleansed. They've seen the multitudes fed. That just happened. And they have even seen the raising of the dead. Also, by this point, they had been used of Christ himself to go out to perform the same works of God, including but not limited to the casting out of demons, the healing of the sick, the cleansing of the lepers, and the raising of the dead. So in a sense, I can understand after Matthew 8 why they still had some hesitations, but in Matthew 14, are they still in the same place spiritually? And if so, why? This is a probing question. Why are you still afraid? Why are you still doubting? You've been here before. Didn't I bail you out last time? And I think that the Lord still lovingly, but maybe as time progresses, a bit more firmly, not angrily, but firmly impresses that question on our hearts. You see, those to whom much is given, much is required. And as you progress in the Lord and as you go through some things, again, it's the expectation that you begin to live your life more according to his ways than your own default positions, which are always garbage, always full of fear and doubt and anxiety and beyond. So in light of all that you've been through, why are you still afraid? And I'm going to be honest with you before I close with one final question. There's no good answer to that. Because for the Lord to say, why are you afraid, indicates that really in the grand scheme of things, you don't have a sufficient reason to be afraid anymore. Haven't you seen enough? I don't ask you that question to condemn, but maybe to convict. I'm talking to myself as well. Do you think I have this faith thing perfected? No. But you know what? My goal personally is to strive in a Christward direction. And I'll stumble and fall along the way. That I promise you. Stick around long enough, I'll disappoint you. But there's a trajectory to this thing. And over time, given enough spiritual ground, you'll look back and say, you know what? Yeah, I've dealt with a lion before and a bear. I can take Goliath. Not because you're arrogant, but because you're properly humbled and you recognize who Goliath is in relationship to the Lord, who is far superior. Final one. Luke 12, go there please, and I will end with this. That is not a pastoral lie. Luke 12. And we're going to look at verse 25, then we're going to backtrack and read it in context. This is going to be a very brief point, but this is the final icing on the cake of questions that deal with matters of faith. Luke 12, verse 25. Jesus is talking to his own, and he asks a rhetorical question, which means that he wasn't looking for an answer, but he was seeking to expose these people to the truth. Verse 25 of Luke 12, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? All eyes this way. I'm going to ask a question. Raise a hand if you were so inclined. If you don't, we'll just assume that the answer is your hand is raised. How many have ever spent time worrying before? How many find it, honestly, it's easy to worry? How many have spent more than 1 hour of your collective life worrying about something? Hello. Is the Roomba about to turn on during my final point? You be quiet over there. If it starts up, just let it go about its business. It's totally fine. For all of those hours of cumulative worrying, you ready for the hard part? What good did it really do you? Every second of worry is a waste of time. Luke 12. Let's pick it up now in verse 22, a couple of verses earlier. You're already in 25. Jesus said to his disciples, and again, he's speaking to people who've committed to following him. So if you're here this morning and you've committed to following Jesus, indirectly these words are for you. I tell you, don't worry about your life, what you'll eat, or about your body, what you will wear. Now, that is not a call to be reckless or casual. You're called to be a good steward, work hard. We're not talking about proper planning. We're talking about worrying. There's a distinction between those two. Don't worry about those things. Life's more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They don't sow or reap, yet they have no storeroom or barn, but God feeds them. And I love this question, another question of Jesus. And how much more valuable are you than birds? Verse 25, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? And he concludes with, since you can't do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Let me give you an updated translation based upon what we just said. If all of your worrying for the last number of years didn't do you any good so far, why keep doing it? Insanity is defined as how? Doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. If you eat Twinkies all day and don't move and you expect a six-pack, I wish you well. Doesn't work that way. In a life that is full of vitality and health and in ever-increasing function, fear has to be something and worry has to be something that is continually excised and dealt with and removed. My garden at home is already overrun with weeds, and I haven't seen a single blossom yet. because the weeds just proliferate. You have to deal with those things. I just weed whack and weed kill everything so that nothing grows. I'd pave the world. Verse 27, consider how the lilies grow. Jesus is appealing to nature. They don't labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor, this ancient king, was dressed like one of these. And if that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you? You of what kind of faith? Little faith. Don't set your heart on what you're going to eat or drink. Don't worry about it. Again, that's not something you're to be consumed with a fearful attitude about. The pagan world runs after these things. Your Father knows that you need them. You know, it's fun as a parent now, raising a little one, because I never realized how many spiritual lessons are involved in raising a kid. Years ago, Bubba told me, when you get to adopt or have your own, you're going to learn so much of the Father's heart. And can I tell you that that's absolutely true? Sometimes our little one will ask me, Daddy, are you going to feed me breakfast tomorrow? Yeah, that's what a good father does. Haven't I fed you 100 other times? And there's a part where if she were to persist in doubting my love and affection, it would actually hurt to a degree. What am I doing that gives you reason to doubt me, in a sense? And I think that our Heavenly Father is that way. He knows what you need. He knows what you need before you even ask, before the word is formed on your tongue. Why bother praying then? Because he wants to hear from you now and then. And it's his way of ensuring contact and communication. Seek first the kingdom, verse 31. And these things will be given to you. In other words, you prioritize the spiritual relationship with the Lord, he is going to add the rest and give you capacities for the rest. And I'll end with this. Don't be afraid, little flock. For your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Who's ever heard of do not lie before, one of the 10 commandments, which indicates that lying is a sin, correct? Something that is forbidden. Who's ever heard do not murder before? Do not hate. Do not envy. All of these things that we categorize as sin, why do we treat fear as something other? Because what does he say here? Do not fear. In other words, that when we're trafficking in fear, we're going in a direction contrary to his desire. Can I recommend to you this morning, try this thing called faith. Do you believe that he's able to do whatever this you may have? And do you want him to? Do you want to get well? Why are you afraid? And why are you still doubting if you are? And who of you, by all of this worrying, can do anything to change the condition of your life? What has it gotten you thus far? All of these are meant to point you to the only one who is genuinely able. And I would call you to trust him and watch what he can do as you do. Heavenly Father, I thank you that you've invited us to this relationship that is founded upon faith. God, it's hard. You have wired this thing where we cannot operate in your kingdom without faith. We can't find entry into it without faith. We cannot live without faith, and our story will not properly conclude apart from faith either. Lord, I pray in this room that you would cultivate people who look to you, who trust you, who are actively entrusting themselves and their every need into your hands. Lord, I pray you would wipe away every element of fear and doubt and uncertainty and hesitation and anxiety. Lord, for those of us who are prone to go in those directions, I pray that you would help us to choose a better path. Because, God, that's where life and life to the full really begins to proliferate. And we want to see more and more of it so that we can live up to our namesake of new life. New life in Christ, new creations who are living according to a whole new pattern of teaching and beyond. As we go our separate ways, God, I pray you'd bless. I pray that you would keep. I pray that you would make your face to shine upon each one of us. Be gracious to us. Lord, turn your face to us and give us peace. In Jesus' name.